Justin, a more serious and sad topic, but what is with all of these athletes, news reporters, random people that are dying or having heart attacks at a very young and healthy age? I cannot make my head around it, but there are some scary stuff that we are seeing in the data. A quick clip from this video.
Prior to COVID and the COVID-19 vaccines, there were roughly 29 cardiac arrests in those European sports leagues per year. Since the Vax campaign began, there have been more than 1,500 total cardiac arrests in those leagues.
So think about that, Justin. If you were going from a statistical point of view, this is just European athletes, which is a pretty small range of people, but on average, they were seeing 29 cardiac arrests per year, kind of heart failures and this disease. But over the past year, which there's only one variable that has really changed, we have now seen an increase to 1,500 per year. That is just such a drastic change. And the more you read into this, and we've already gotten quite a few videos taken down from YouTube, so we have to kind of tiptoe around these subjects, but that is really just the beginning. And I mean, all I'm seeing right now are people just dropping. And what would, Justin, taking a more psychological stance on this, what do you think the public perception would be if they were promised something that was sold as safe and effective, and then they found out that their family members, them, potentially their children, are getting severe reactions to these quote unquote safe and effective medicines? What do you think the public perception to something like that would be? Because this was a worldwide scale. Every single country was mandating this. If you were forced to take something that, I mean, you were down to take because it was safe and effective and it was saving lives, then it turned out that it wasn't saving lives, and now it's having extreme adverse effects in many different cases. What would your perception be?
Yeah, right. So when approaching, this topic or any topic like this, it's important to remember that wet streets do not cause it to rain. Rather, rain is what causes wet streets. And so the reason I throw this out there is that when it comes to like a complex system, like, the human body or whatever, right, there will always be multiple factors and multiple variables out there. So kind of like that out of the way. And just be very careful about jumping for a conclusion, and make sure you've got your causation running correct, or just always assume that you might have a mistake in your causation. It's probably a good mental hedge to use for yourself. To your question, the two things that you would see happen is, number one, you would probably have it's the old joke, but it's what's the first stage? Denial, then grief, or the stages of grief. So to slightly change the definition, if you had a widely held viewpoint by the majority of the public, particularly one that was pushed, propagated, and parroted by mainstream media, Twitter, whatever, right, over and over and over again, if suddenly that narrative were shown to be in question or compromised, the first thing is people would probably seek to reject it. They say, well, wait a minute, I don't want to even hear this. Consider the source. Who's actually saying this? So that's kind of engaging the faculties of denial to try to keep it at bay and not deal with it. But if it continues beyond that, then you would probably move on to a form of anger, because people eventually realize if the narrative does collapse to the point where it can no longer be defended, people say, well, wait a minute, we at best were misinformed, if not outright lied to by people we trusted, and it looks like we trusted those people in error. It would not be the first time such a mistake has been made, but in the case of someone's health or something as personal and as important as someone's health, it strikes pretty close to home. So I guess kind of the fallout from that you would see just. So one of the big fallouts from that, I think, is you would see the further mainstream loss of trust in the traditional institutions that are out there, whether it's the government, whether it's the medical establishment, whether it's the science, whether it's the mainstream media. Anyone still trusts them, but whatever, I suppose that there are. That's what I think the fallout from that would be. And that's not even getting, and just not even getting into the actual effects of what's actually going on. That's just the psychological.
Health issues beside, once somebody stops trusting the government, they will never trust it again. Or if they do, it would take drastic measures. It's kind of like if a currency is failing. And if a currency is going through hyperinflation, there is almost no way to bring back that confidence unless something major happens, like backing it by gold. But if that happens, I mean, there's a lot of other cross currents going on. But
Yeah.
basically, what would the follow-up be by the people? Because you could only think that there would be mass protest or riots, and in some countries, maybe even like an overthrowing of the government as they see it. Because think about it, on some of these countries where they were, like, let's take Australia or Canada, for example, or maybe some tougher countries than that. But let's just take Canada, and where they were having a 100% vaccine mandate, where every single person was forced to get it no matter what. And then if they find out that they were forced to do all this, we saw in the trucker movement, which was one of the biggest things back in the day. Actually, they had so much support for that, it wasn't even funny. But if you see these adverse reactions coming up, and then a massive distrust for the medicine, and everyone that took it is upset, I don't know what the reaction would be, because the protest that we saw just against the mandates, it would be nothing like that, because some people, or almost every single person, was forced to get their child the medicine, and that is a big.
Yeah. So I'm going to quibble with the word forced. My definition of the word forced is someone had a gun to your head and they would have pulled the trigger if you did not get the vaccine. I think many people were coerced, and I think many people were weak, and I think many people did not explore all their options. But to use the word forced, no, I don't buy that, unless literally somebody had a gun, or if their life was in immediate direct danger, then I will say, okay, that was forced. But if it wasn't forced, if it doesn't meet that bar, no, that was coerced. And I'm sorry if someone was coerced, but there's a difference between coercion and being forced.
Yeah, I agree with you, but for the average person who has a job, a family, it is very difficult to choose for their child not to go to school, for them to get fired, and for pretty much
Josh,
to not
I
be
hear what
allowed.
you're saying. The word we will use is coerced, not
Okay,
forced.
if that's what you want, fine. But it would just cause so much mayhem, and then we're seeing videos like this. Have you seen this, Justin? Let me play it.
There was Alpha, then Delta, then Omicron next. But this latest variant might be the best.
Dude.
It's XBB.1.5. Another brand of COVID-19 has arrived. It's a new.
At that point, if somebody, this, I am sparing the viewers right now, or lack thereof, from watching the rest of this video, but is one of the most disturbing things. And this was from a few nights ago. This is still going on. The pure, just disgustingness of Jimmy Kimmel dancing about a new COVID variant right now. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, so I would say probably the worst thing I saw was Colbert's one with the vaccines, but we don't need to go into a thing on that front.
That was just a few nights ago, Justin.
Yeah.
How is this the perception? Do they think the average person is that stupid?
Probably. I can't read minds, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's what they think. There was an interesting thing I was reading, and I don't know who wrote it, so this is not my thinking, but I think it's a fun thought experiment to say. And supposedly it was some guy who had the beans spilled by some elite or whatever. Right? Just consider this like a fun thought experiment. And the point is that the elite was basically saying, or the shadowy person behind the scenes was basically saying, well, look, of course we knew what was going to happen. Of course we knew that people were going to turn. So in a situation like this, where if you have something that let's say half the public believes to be true, and suddenly it turns out that they were misled, well, half the public is going to be pissed off, and the other half of the public that never believed the government in the first place is going to be pissed off even more. So everyone's going to be essentially pissed off at the government and the authority figures or whatever. And the takeaway from this was, yes, we were able to foresee this, predict it, whatever. And the reason we wanted this to be the case was we wanted kind of everyone across the world to cry out at once saying, wait a minute, our governments suck, this is ridiculous. Look at what they've done. If only we had a one world government, if only we had something to come back in. And the reason I mentioned this, again, think of this as like a fun thought experiment. Okay, so that's kind of how you, or like reading a political thriller. But what I do note about this is that if you basically piss off everyone, regardless of their stance on the medicine mandate, regardless of the choice on the medicine mandate, if that narrative blows up and is shown to be blow up, and not only blow up, but blow up with very serious adverse health consequences, then I can't think of anything more that would unify people in their fear, and rightfully so, fear at the establishment or anything that provided a semblance of authority before. So the point is that there's going to be very strong public urge to kind of tear down whatever's there. So you get everyone on board with this line of thinking, and that also means that if you already had a other system, in the woodwork ready to go, and if the people are suddenly crying out saying, "Hey, listen, these governments suck. We need a solution," and suddenly if you have the solution, off the shelf that just happens to be there ready to go, you're able to give the people exactly what they want. Essentially, you create the problem intentionally. The problem happens. You're not necessarily blamed for the problem. Rather, what takes the blame for the problem is the thing, again, from, the evil elite's perspective or whatever, right, that you want to get rid of. That's, regional governments is probably the better way to say it. And in the process of getting rid of regional governments, the US, Canada, Europe, whatever, right, you're then able to step into the void with, your overarching one world government and consolidate power in that regard. Anyways, I thought it was a fun thought experiment. I'm not necessarily saying I disagree or agree with Josh. You're muted.
That is both terrifying and interesting, because I was actually thinking of it from the other point of view, where I was thinking, well, maybe if this were to happen, this would demand the public to want smaller government and to not be ruled like wet dogs and being peed on and being told that it's rain. But it could be the absolute opposite. So it really depends on what side the public chooses, because if they lie down and prayed to be peed on and they're just happy that somebody's generous enough to piss on them, then we could just go into that kind of one world government like you were talking about. But Justin, as we know, it would be incredibly difficult for a one world government, just because think about how hard it would be to rule the entire world. There's doing a tops down approach, it would be nearly impossible, but it would suck for the individual freedoms of everybody.
So let me say I would say a yes and a no on that front. What I would say is that getting the majority of people pissed off at the existing system, again, whether you're on the left, whether you're on the right, whether you're pro-mandate or anti-mandate, whether you're a Dem or Republican, whatever, right? It doesn't matter. Everyone is going to be on the same page with that. When everyone gets on the same page here, especially if they're pissed off at the existing authority thing, it opens the door to people willing to accept great change. So I would say that much I think is going to happen universally. Now, to your point, Josh, where do people go? That's a very interesting thing. And I think that actually you get back into who can control the context of the narrative. Think back to one of the favorite clips of the Colonel from Metal Gear Solid 2, the creation of the context, assigning people their opinions, as, Adams, is a very wise, I think.
And that brings me back to when I was on a flight to Naples, Florida, a few months ago when the mask mandate was still in act. And during that time, I would say about 10% of the plane took their masks off, and at first, you're going to Naples, Florida, for heaven's sake. So it was old people who really didn't want to deal with this. And at first, the flight attendants were saying, "Hey guys, please, we need you to put them back on." And then what happened? From 10%, it goes to 15, 20%. And once that 20% mark, it didn't even have to be 20%, but you have enough civil unrest, or people are choosing not to follow the construct that is being told. And when that happens, it is impossible for the ruler to take over. And it just stopped. They just stopped coming around.
Yeah, and more importantly, remember I was fond of saying it, make it very easy for the people you deal with to say yes, because the flight attendant probably, they didn't want to wear their mask either. I can't read mine. Let's say they didn't. But the thing is, if they have a passenger revolt on their hands, they're like, well, hey, we tried. Shucks, we had to take off. Here's a funny story, Josh. Many moons ago, I used to be a teller back in high school, and I worked at a bank inside a grocery store, Washington Mutual, before the bank from hell took them over. Anyways, I was never there when it happened, but we got robbed 3 times over the course of like 2 years, and twice it was the same dude. Anyway, so here's the point, right? Everyone thinks like a bank robbery is going to be something. Well, I guess it could be, but so somebody just hands in a note across the counter, and like, okay, fine, here's the money, whatever, right? But one of my bosses at the time, who I really liked, she had this routine down because she had been robbed so many times before. She was okay, everybody closed down. She picks up the phone, calls like our regional manager. We just had a code, whatever, and everyone's pretty shaken up. We're going to take the rest of the day off. Click. It's like, oh, score, we get to go home. So it was that was a story of being robbed. Of course, you don't want to be robbed. The first time you go through, your adrenaline's probably running a little bit. But the point is by the time you've been through it enough, it's like, oh, good, a half day. Why couldn't you come earlier? There would have been more money in the drawer. So it would make it easy for employees to say yes, essentially, as a side thing there.
Yeah, so it does seem like stuff is going on, but to the good news, Justin, it does not seem like the adverse reactions are as bad as people potentially thought. But the bad news seems to happen with the more shots that you get. And I was fortunate enough to spend quite a bit of time with Chris Martenson. And I don't want to speak for him, but what I interpreted of what he was telling me was your natural immunity towards regular sicknesses, it seems to go down the more of these shots that you get. And this was almost a year ago, so his opinion could be completely changed by now. But the more that you get, the worse for you. But it seems like the majority of people are no longer getting booster shots, which I would not say is a good thing, but it could be perceived as not a bad thing.
Yeah, so I guess what I would say is, I think I've said this before, but I'm generally a big fan of Scott Adams. I think he does many things right. He gets a few things I think really wrong, but again, so do we all. But what I would say is, when it comes to the medicine mandates and things in general, let's just keep it in the context of the medicine mandates. Like, don't really be sure of anything. Do not be sure that they work. Do not be sure that they do not work. Do not be sure that you're going to get myocarditis. Do not be sure that you might be better protected from getting, myocarditis, which is kind of one of the big narratives on the other side of the fence right now that's going on. The key takeaway from all of this is that, or at least that I've interpreted and I try to remember up here, is that nobody knows anything. And probably the most credible thing somebody can say is, we know nothing. I mean, we can talk about the data we have. We can show you the results. But in terms of what's going on, even if you're trying to be completely intellectually honest and just, let your conclusions go wherever the data takes, if you don't have all the data, or if you don't have all the material data that's there, or you're missing parts of the material data, again, your conclusions are going to be wrong. And it might not be through, trying to be wrong, trying to push a narrative, trying to do anything, sinister. So anyways, that's my key thing from all of this, is that whatever you do, be very, very cautious of certainty of your certainty, and be very, very cautious of people who are certain of their certainty. And what I would say too, in more of a general sense, and this is not, of course, medical advice or anything like that. This is just me speaking for myself, of like my logic going through this. I don't know one way or the other where this is going to go. I think it's going to go somewhere. I think it's going to be material. I think for either good or for bad, it's going to cast a long shadow into the future. I think that's the case. But of which way it's going to break, I don't know. And I'll be the first one to tell you that. But here is what I will cautiously consider to draw my decision. Going back to when this stuff was first breaking out, you looked at the survival rate as limited and as poor as it was for those who were getting the cerveza sickness. And again, at the very beginning, nobody knew what was, or it was very hard to find any information that was going on. We were, again, in the fog of war. And then within, Josh, what was it? About less than a year, we had the medical treatment, that came on, forward as well. Okay. So, okay, good. Makes sense. I'd rather have more tools than less tools. But again, when I looked at the data, as pathetic as it was, and as incomplete as it was, and as much as I'm not quite to even look at data in the first place, I came to the conclusion, and hopefully this proves me right, that I'd rather not do anything. Because at the end of the day, I mean, how old is humanity? I mean, how many years of hundreds of millions of years of evolution do we have built into ourselves? The point is, we have an immune system built into ourselves. And if, assuming, the data was correct, that we weren't seeing, a majority of people, thankfully, drop dead. In other words, if the survival rate for, a male in his mid-30s was, let's say north of 99%, I guess I would say, because I don't know what the answer to this is, I don't know what the scare factor is and the impact of COVID and long COVID will be. I don't know what the impact of the medical treatments will be on the long term. I just don't know. But I do know that I have, a millennia or whatever, right, of an immune system standing behind me. And I do know with a 99% survival rate going through this, at least initially, again, without any real knowing what the long implications of this will be, I'd rather guess on what has worked historically than the new thing. Again, with no other data, with no other data that I really trust out there, I would trust the precedent of evolution that got us, that got the species to where we are. And again, that's just me speaking for me.
All right, guys, we'll see you in the next one.